The silverware trembled slightly in my hand as my sister's voice sliced through the Christmas dinner chatter. Her words were laced with that same poisoned sweetness she'd perfected since childhood, an art form really of degrading me while pretending concern. "It's just so sad that some people never reach their potential," Olivia said, her eyes flicking toward me with mock pity. Her diamond bracelet caught the candlelight, casting sparks across the tablecloth, as if even the room itself wanted to amplify her performance. I forced my chest to rise steadily, even as my lungs tightened. Mr. Townsend, her boss invited as the evening's guest of honor, chuckled on cue, swirling his wine as if it were part of the act. Their laughter seemed to echo louder than the clinking of cutlery, louder than the faint Christmas carols drifting in from the living room. My parents exchanged that look. The look I had known since I was 15, the look that told me in one glance that I had disappointed them yet again. 17 years of disappointment since I had abandoned the family plan. 17 years since I stopped living according to their script. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket. The fourth urgent message from the board. Tomorrow's acquisition. The final signatures that would close a deal worth billions. The deal that would make or break Townsend's entire career. And all it required was me. My name is Catherine. I am 32 years old. And this is the story of how I stopped hiding my success from the family that had only ever defined me by my failures. I hadn't intended to reveal anything tonight. For 5 years I had lived 2 lives. The family knew only of one Catherine, the underachiever, the community college instructor who scraped by in a shabby apartment, who drove a second-hand Honda who had long ago failed to launch. The other Catherine, the real Catherine, had been busy quietly building an empire. While Olivia bragged about each rung of the corporate ladder she clawed her way up, I had been busy restructuring entire industries. Through layers of shell companies and careful acquisitions, I had built Summit Enterprises into a powerhouse that could topple giants. And last year, Summit had quietly acquired Townsend's firm, finalizing the merger, while Olivia celebrated her so-called promotion. None of them knew. Not my parents, not Olivia, not even Townsend himself. "Kathy," my mother said suddenly, shattering my thoughts. "The garage is all ready for you. We put a space heater out there since Amanda needs the guest room. She's pregnant, you know." The words struck with the cold precision of a blade. The garage, on Christmas Eve. The table fell into that heavy silence I knew too well, where relatives pretended not to listen while savoring every syllable. This was tradition now, Catherine being put in her place. "The garage," I repeated softly, my voice steady despite the December chill seeping through the windows. "Don't be dramatic," Mom said, passing the cranberry sauce without even glancing at me. "There's a heater. You're used to modest accommodations." My knife cut slowly through the turkey, deliberate, controlled. I thought of my penthouse overlooking Central Park, the Maui retreat, the private island purchased under a discreet holding company, all carefully hidden beneath the camouflage of mediocrity. "The garage is fine," I said evenly. "It's probably better than what most of my community college students have." Olivia's smile widened. She loved when I played into the illusion of failure. To her, every mention of my teaching job was proof that she had triumphed over me. "That's the spirit," she said, lightly raising her glass. "At least you know your place." After dinner, Olivia escorted me to the garage. It was as bleak as I had expected, bare concrete, the bitter cold gnawing through the thin walls. An old cot had been wedged between Dad's golf clubs and boxes of dusty Christmas decorations. A threadbare blanket folded at one end, as if modest charity might soften humiliation. "Dinner tomorrow at 7, Olivia said, her voice echoing against the cold cement. "Try not to track dirt in when you come back inside." The door shut. Darkness. Silence broken only by the low hum of the space heater struggling against the winter. I pulled out my phone. 3 urgent emails from the board required my attention before tomorrow's meeting, the same meeting where Mr. Townsend would be presenting his quarterly reports. Unaware, his future rested entirely in my hands. A text from my assistant lit up the screen. Mr. Townsend asked again about meeting you before tomorrow's board meeting. Should I tell him you're unavailable? I typed back with a faint smile. No, let him think I'm still in London. Tomorrow's dinner will be more interesting. I changed into fresh clothes, slipping my designer blouse beneath an old sweater. The garage was freezing, but I had endured worse. I remembered the early years, nights spent on a sagging futon while working 18-hour days, scouring contracts, negotiating deals, risking everything to build what I now owned. Olivia had celebrated each minor title change. I had stayed awake redrafting acquisition strategies that would change entire markets. And here I was, again reduced in their eyes to nothing, while holding in my hand the power to upend the future of everyone at that dining room table. The next evening, precisely at 7, I walked into the dining room once again, assigned to the far end of the table. Olivia sat near the head beside Townsend, glowing in the candlelight, her laughter floating across the china and crystal like a crown of victory. Catherine Dad announced Olivia was just telling us about her promotion. Junior Vice President of Operations. Isn't that wonderful? I nodded, accepting my plate of turkey. Congratulations, Liv. Summit Enterprises must be impressed with your work. Townsend beamed, pride swelling in his voice. She's one of our rising stars. The merger with Summit has created so many opportunities for talent like Olivia. Mom clasped her hands. We were worried at first when we heard Summit acquired the company, but it's turned out wonderfully, though no one seems to know much about Summit's CEO. So mysterious, isn't she? Olivia leaned forward eagerly. Apparently she's some recluse. Rumor is she lives in London or Tokyo. No one at my level has ever seen her. I took a slow sip of wine, hiding my smile. If only they knew that the woman they gossiped about was sitting right there, relegated to a cot in their garage. I heard she's brilliant, Townsend added reverently. Transformed at least a dozen companies in 5 years. Built Summit from nothing. Olivia scoffed. She can't be that brilliant if she hides from everyone. Probably some trust fund baby who got lucky. Just then, Townsend's phone buzzed. His face paled. He excused himself to the hallway, but his voice carried, "No, I haven't reached Mrs. CEO yet. Yes, I understand how important she is. I'll try again before the board meeting." When he returned, flustered, Olivia tried to regain his attention by boasting about her latest achievement, restructuring operations, claiming she had saved millions. I glanced at my phone beneath the table. The actual reports told a different story. Her changes had cost the company nearly $3 million in inefficiencies, and I had been watching the fallout for weeks. "More wine, Catherine?" Mom asked, perhaps hoping to keep me silent. Then, as if twisting the knife, she added, "Maybe just water, given your financial situation." Olivia laughed softly, savoring the cruelty. Townsend's phone buzzed again. He stepped out once more, nearly begging into the receiver, "Please, just 5 minutes with Mrs. CEO before tomorrow's meeting." I leaned back in my chair, the corners of my mouth curling upward. Perhaps it was cruel to let it play out like this, but after years of humiliation, of sleeping in garages while others drank from crystal glasses, I felt entitled to a little theater. The candles flickered as the December wind howled against the windows, rattling them in their frames. The dining room, warm and bright, seemed to glow with Olivia's laughter. She was in her element, reveling in the attention of Mr. Townsend, who hung on her every self-aggrandizing word. I sat quietly at the far end of the table where my parents had always placed me, as though physical distance might also translate into emotional insignificance. My plate was already cooling, the cranberry sauce congealing in place, but no one noticed. That was the point. I wasn't meant to be seen, not in their world. "Catherine, dear," my father said, finally addressing me, his voice carrying that familiar edge of disdain. "What is it you're teaching these days?" "Home economics, introductory composition." The table chuckled. Even Townsend smirked politely. "Business," I answered, simply keeping my eyes on my fork as I moved peas around my plate. "Mostly organizational strategy." Olivia laughed, shaking her head as though I had just made a charmingly naive comment. "Organizational strategy. Oh, Kathy, leave the big terms to the real executives." We wouldn't want you confusing your students with things you don't actually understand." The words landed like a slap, but I held my composure. My fingers itched to type into my phone to pull up the reports that proved Olivia had no understanding of the very concepts she mocked me for. Reports signed off by me, the unseen hand behind the empire she so desperately tried to claim. I smiled faintly instead. "You're right, Olivia. I wouldn't want to confuse anyone." She grinned, mistaking my calm for submission. My parents exchanged approving glances, proud of their golden child for keeping her sister in her place. But Townsend's phone buzzed again. He excused himself with a sheepish apology, his voice growing tight as he paced in the hallway. Through the thin walls, I could hear fragments. Yes, I know how critical she is. I understand the stakes. I'll do whatever it takes to secure her trust. When he returned, Olivia leaned close to him, her hand brushing his arm with the familiarity of someone desperate to anchor herself to power. You don't need to worry about Summit's CEO, she purred. I've practically been running things already. They'll see my potential soon enough. My fork clinked against my plate. I lowered it slowly, my patience thinning. I thought about the hundreds of hours I'd spent reviewing her so-called innovations, each one a disaster, each one a mess my teams had quietly cleaned up to avoid exposing her incompetence. But here she was, claiming credit for decisions she hadn't even understood. And here was Townsend nodding along, unwilling to correct her, too afraid of fracturing his fragile alliance with the family that adored her. After dessert, Mom stood with a pointed glance at me. Catherine, would you mind tidying up? Olivia's worked so hard this year, she deserves to relax. The words struck me harder than I expected. I had been scrubbing dishes in this house since I was 8, always told it was my role as the less important daughter. Even now, at 32, with more wealth than every person in that room combined, I was still expected to carry their crumbs. I rose silently, gathering plates while Olivia leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine like a queen surveying her kingdom. Townsend helped her adjust the shawl around her shoulders, his eyes lingering on her as though she were a masterpiece. In the kitchen, the cold air from the garage seeped under the door. I shivered. That cot, that thin blanket waited for me like a cruel reminder of my place. My parents had prepared it with the same thoughtlessness as setting a dog's bed. I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of the counter, until my knuckles turned white. For a moment, I saw myself walking away, slipping into the night, never coming back. But another vision burned brighter, staying watching, letting them all play their parts in the cruel theater they'd written for me. And then, when the curtain rose tomorrow, letting them see who had truly been directing the play all along. When I returned to the dining room, Townsend's phone buzzed again, his face drained of color. He excused himself once more, nearly stumbling in his rush to answer. Olivia rolled her eyes dramatically. He's always on that phone, probably begging Summit's CEO for attention. It's pathetic, really. Dad chuckled. Well, whoever she is, she certainly enjoys her secrecy. Imagine if she turned out to be someone we knew. Wouldn't that be something? The laughter that followed was sharp, dismissive, as though the very idea of me, Catherine, sleeping in the garage, being capable of holding such power was the most absurd fantasy. I excused myself early, retreating to the freezing garage once more. The space heater hummed weakly, fighting a losing battle against the winter night. I lay on the cot, staring up at the ceiling beams, my breath visible in the cold air. My phone buzzed again. A message from my assistant. The board is ready. Mr. Townsend is nervous. Everyone expects tomorrow to be decisive. Should I confirm your attendance in person? I typed slowly, each word deliberate. Yes, I'll be there. Make sure the seating arrangement is educational. My lips curved into a smile. As the night stretched on, memories of past Christmases haunted me. I remembered being 12, begging to sit near the head of the table, only for Olivia to push me toward the corner with a laugh. I remembered being 20, bringing home my first paycheck, only for my father to call it cute pocket change compared to Olivia's internship stipend. And I remembered every year since, when I was told to be grateful for scraps, for leftover kindness, for space heaters in garages. Tomorrow would not erase those wounds. Nothing ever could. But tomorrow would redefine them. The garage door creaked with the wind, the sound like an omen. I pulled the blanket tighter, letting the cold remind me of why I endured. Because pain, when carried long enough, can become fuel, and mine was about to ignite. When dawn came, the frost on the windows glimmered like shards of glass. I rose, dressed carefully in a tailored suit concealed beneath my winter coat, and slipped into the driver's seat of my modest Honda. My parents watched from the porch, no doubt, assuming I was on my way to another small-town classroom. Olivia barely looked up from her phone. But as I drove toward the city, my phone lit with messages from board members, investors, journalists, waiting to hear the outcome of Summit's quarterly meeting. The world was already bracing for what I would decide. And none of the people who had banished me to that freezing garage had the faintest idea that their futures too hung on the words I would soon speak. The city skyline rose before me, glittering with icy light, as if the towers themselves had been dipped in frost. Driving into Manhattan always stirred something inside me. Memories of the nights I had once walked these streets with nothing but a backpack and a vision my fingers numb from the cold as I scribbled notes on acquisitions in coffee-stained notebooks. Back then, no one believed in me. Not my family, not colleagues, not even myself some days. But now, as my modest Honda crept through the maze of yellow cabs and limousines, I felt the hum of quiet power. No one on these streets could guess that the woman in the simple coat and worn boots controlled the fate of companies larger than the very buildings they walked past. When I pulled into the underground garage of Summit's headquarters, my security team was already waiting. They greeted me with warmth, but also deference, stepping aside as I walked through the private elevator reserved for the CEO. The brushed steel doors closed around me, sealing me off from the world. My reflection stared back in the mirrored walls. Catherine, 32. The daughter banished to a garage. The woman no one at that dining table believed in. And yet here I stood, rising floor by floor toward the very heart of an empire they mocked me for not having. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel overlooking the skyline. Long before the meeting began, the table buzzed with anxious energy. Executives shuffled papers, assistants whispered updates, phones buzzed with last-minute calls. And there sat Mr. Townsend, already sweating under the collar of his tailored suit, his eyes darting between his phone and the door. He didn't see me enter at first. His attention was on Olivia, who had tagged along under the pretense of being his protégé. She perched confidently near the center, flipping her hair back as though she belonged there, her laughter far too loud for a room where silence carried more weight than sound. I moved quietly to the head of the table, the chair reserved for me. When I placed my leather folio down, the scrape of its edge against the glass silenced the room. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Townsend froze, his face draining of color as he realized who I was and where I was seated. Olivia blinked, confusion flickering across her face before she forced a smile. "Kathy, what are you doing here?" This is a high-level meeting. Did you get lost?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at her calmly, then at Townsend, who now seemed incapable of swallowing. "I believe I said evenly, this is exactly where I belong." The chairman cleared his throat nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen, shall we begin?" The meeting commenced, but the tension never left. Townsend stumbled through his presentation, graphs and numbers flashing on the massive screen behind him. His voice wavered when he spoke of Olivia's achievements, dressed up as triumphs, but bleeding red on the balance sheets. My fingers tapped against the polished table as I watched him flounder. Every eye flicked toward me, waiting for a signal, a reaction, anything. I remained still, letting the silence build pressure like a storm cloud gathering over the room. Finally, when his voice cracked for the third time, I leaned forward. "Mr. Townsend," I said softly, but every ear caught it. "Perhaps you'd like to explain how these efficiencies resulted in a $3 million loss last quarter." The room stilled. Townsend's jaw clenched. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, glancing between him and me, her bravado faltering. He stammered, Well, these numbers don't capture the full picture. There were external factors, market shifts, unexpected expenses." Or I interrupted, my tone still calm but cutting. "Perhaps the factors were internal. Perhaps they were decisions made without a grasp of strategy. Decisions you allowed because you were too busy clinging to appearances rather than results." Gasps fluttered across the table. Olivia flushed crimson, her lips parting in shock. "Excuse me, You've been selling illusions, Olivia." I continued, my gaze steady on hers. "Illusions that my teams have quietly cleaned up while you took the credit. But illusions don't pay shareholders, and illusions don't build empires." For a moment she was silent. The confidence, the smug smile she always wore, it crumbled under the weight of truth. Townsend shifted in his seat, trying to salvage what dignity he could. "With all due respect, who are you to make such accusations?" The room waited breathless. I leaned back, my hands folded neatly. "I am Catherine Miller, founder and CEO of Summit Enterprises. And as of this moment, the woman who controls not only your future, Mr. Townsend, but this entire company." The silence was absolute. Townsend's mouth opened, then closed. His face went from pale to ashen, beads of sweat breaking across his forehead. Olivia's chair scraped against the floor as she nearly stood, her voice trembling. You're lying. You can't be. Kathy, you sleep in garages. You drive that car. Yes, I said simply, my voice carrying like steel across the glass walls. Because I chose to let you believe that version of me. Because it was easier for you to mock a Catherine who was weak than to confront the Catherine who was stronger than all of you combined. Murmurs rippled around the table. Executives leaned forward, some with awe, others with fear. I rose slowly from my chair. This acquisition will proceed as planned, but there will be changes. Real ones. And if anyone in this room believes they can continue building careers on illusions, my gaze cut sharply to Olivia. They will not have a place here. Townsend's voice cracked. Please, Mrs. Miller, I had no idea. I lifted a hand, silencing him. You should have. That's what makes you unfit. The chairman cleared his throat again, his voice low but reverent. Motion carried then. Catherine Miller remains CEO of Summit Enterprises. The vote was unanimous. I gathered my papers, my heart pounding though my face betrayed nothing. For years they had written me out of the story. Tonight, I had rewritten it. As I left the boardroom, Olivia stumbled after me. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Why didn't you tell us? I paused, turning back to her. Because you never would have believed me. You preferred me in the garage. Her lips trembled, but no words came. I walked past her, each step steady, deliberate, final. Outside, the winter wind cut sharp against my face, but for once I didn't feel the cold. I felt free. When I returned to my parents' house that evening, the air was still thick with the smell of roasted ham and mulled wine. Laughter echoed faintly from the living room, where relatives had gathered for Christmas Eve games and stories. To them, nothing had changed. I was still the invisible daughter, the one banished to the garage, the one who served as the punchline to their casual cruelties. But Olivia knew, Townsend knew, and soon my entire family would know too. I slipped quietly through the front door, brushing the snow from my coat. Olivia's voice carried across the hall, high and desperate though she tried to keep it low. She lied to me, she hissed at Townsend. She lied to everyone. She can't be who she says she is. Townsend's reply was muffled, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. She is. The board confirmed it. Catherine. Catherine owns everything. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, her face flushed with the warmth of the oven. She looked at me with the same dismissive glance she had given all my life. Garage is still warm. I made sure the heater's on. Go settle in, we'll call you if we need help with dishes. I met her eyes calmly. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink beneath her coldness. No, I said softly. I won't be sleeping in the garage tonight. She blinked, startled by the steel in my tone. Don't be ridiculous, Catherine. Amanda needs the guest room. You'll just have to make do. I set down my folio, letting the leather thud against the console table. Amanda can have the guest room. You can all keep this house for that matter. But remember this, the mortgage is owned by Summit Enterprises, which means it's mine. You banished me to the garage while I held the deed to the roof above your heads. The room fell into a stunned silence. Olivia stumbled in her face, pale, Townsend trailing helplessly behind her. Don't listen to her, Olivia sputtered. She's just trying to humiliate me. Kathy doesn't own anything. She's been hiding in that shabby apartment for years. I turned toward her slowly, every word deliberate. That apartment was camouflage. Every chair you sit on at the office, every report you file, every penny of your paycheck, it comes from me. I am the CEO of Summit Enterprises. I own the company you cling to like a life raft. And you, my gaze cut like a blade, you've been nothing more than a liability I tolerated out of mercy. Her mouth opened, then closed again. No words came. Dad appeared from the living room, his expression caught between disbelief and anger. Catherine, this isn't funny. You don't talk to your sister that way. I almost laughed. Even now, confronted with truth, his instinct was to protect her and silence me. Do you think this is a joke? I asked, my voice rising for the first time. Do you think I spent years working 18-hour days, building an empire from scratch, just to play pretend? You mocked me, dismissed me, shoved me into garages and corners, but every humiliation became fuel, and now whether you accept it or not, the power is mine. The silence that followed was heavier than snow pressing against the roof. My mother's lips quivered as though she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, Townsend broke it. She's telling the truth. Catherine is Summit's CEO. The board confirmed it. And after today's meeting, there's no question about it. Gasps rippled through the relatives in the living room. Whispers rose like wildfire. The forgotten daughter. The garage exile, the scapegoat, she owned everything. Olivia shook her head violently, her voice breaking. You can't do this to me, Kathy. I worked so hard. No, I cut her off sharply. You worked hard to perform, to take credit, to laugh while I carried the weight. But the truth is, every accomplishment you paraded was built on my back. And tonight you wanted me in the garage freezing while you basked in attention you never earned. That ends now. Her tears glittered under the Christmas lights, but they did not move me. I turned to my parents, my chest heaving, years of suppressed pain crashing against the surface. Do you remember when I was 15 and you told me Olivia would carry the family name and I would just get by? Do you remember every holiday where you sat me at the far end of the table where you spoke of my life like it was a cautionary tale? You wanted me to be small, but I refused. And now the empire you gossip about at parties belongs to the daughter you shoved into the shadows. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My mother's eyes filled with something like fear. I picked up my folio again, my hand steady now. Enjoy your Christmas. Tomorrow the world will know the truth. And you will have to live with the knowledge that the daughter you banished is the one who saved and controls your future. With that, I turned and walked toward the door. The cold night air hit my face sharp and clean, 1,000 times warmer than the suffocating house I left behind. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I crossed the driveway, my breath clouding before me. I could still hear Olivia's sobs through the walls, could still feel my parents' silence pressing behind me like a shadow. But for once, it didn't crush me. Because I was no longer Catherine the Forgotten, no longer the daughter in the garage. I was Catherine Miller, CEO of Summit Enterprises, and tonight I had reclaimed the narrative they had stolen from me. The stars above glittered like shards of glass, fierce and cold. I lifted my face to them, my breath steady, my heart strong. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. The next morning, the headlines broke. Summit Enterprises CEO revealed Catherine Miller. My phone buzzed non-stop, flooded with congratulatory messages from investors, journalists, requesting interviews and allies I had carefully cultivated over the years. The image of me leaving the boardroom the night before, calm and composed, was already circulating across every news outlet. The world was stunned. My family, I imagined, was in shock. By noon, Olivia called. 6 times. I let it ring. Finally, a text appeared. We need to talk, please. For years, I had begged for scraps of her kindness. Now she begged for my ear. The irony was almost poetic. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I sat in my penthouse, the morning light spilling across the polished marble floors, and let myself feel everything: relief, rage, vindication. But beneath it all was something quieter, deeper: grief. Because no matter how much power I had claimed, no matter how public my triumph, the wounds they had carved into me still ached. Success couldn't erase the years I had spent believing I was unworthy. It couldn't erase the countless nights I had cried in silence, begging for a family who would never see me. And yet it had given me something else: perspective. That evening I returned to my parents' house one last time. Not to stay, not to beg, but to face them in the clarity of daylight. The living room was hushed when I entered, every eye on me. Olivia sat on the couch, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. My parents stood stiffly by the fireplace, unable to mask their discomfort. Catherine. Dad began, his voice heavy with forced authority. Why didn't you tell us? I met his gaze. Because you never would have believed me. You only ever believed in Olivia. My mother's lips trembled. We thought you were struggling. We wanted to push you to do better. I almost laughed. Pushing me into the garage on Christmas Eve was your way of helping me. Silence. The truth hung between us like smoke, suffocating, undeniable. Olivia's voice broke as she whispered, I'm sorry. The words startled me. She had never said them before. Her hands twisted in her lap, her diamond bracelet catching the light, the same one that had glittered when she mocked me at dinner. Now it looked dull, meaningless. You're sorry because you lost, I said softly. Not because you hurt me. Her tears spilled over, and for the first time, I didn't feel envy or anger. I felt pity. Olivia had spent her whole life climbing ladders she hadn't built, mistaking applause for love. Without her illusions, she was left with nothing. You asked me last night why I never told you, I continued. The truth is, I wanted to. I wanted to share my victories, to let you see me. But every time I tried, you mocked me, belittled me, shoved me further into the shadows. So I built my empire in silence. And when the time came, I let the silence speak louder than I ever could. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their eyes wet though they tried to hide it. I picked up my coat, my voice steady now. I don't need your approval. I never did. But I needed you to know that you were wrong, about me, about everything. I turned to leave but paused at the door. And for the record, the garage wasn't the coldest place I've ever been. The coldest place was sitting at your table year after year while you made me invisible. The silence that followed was final. I stepped outside, the crisp winter air wrapping around me like truth. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked to my car. For the first time, I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in strength. As I drove back toward the city, the weight that had pressed on my chest for years seemed to lift. The skyline greeted me like an old friend, bright and unyielding. In that moment, I realized something. Revenge isn't always about destroying others. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply becoming everything they told you you'd never be. I thought of the garage, the cot, the thin blanket. I thought of Olivia's laughter, my parents' silence, Townsend's arrogance. And then I thought of the boardroom, the unanimous vote, the headlines declaring my name. The contrast was staggering, and yet I knew my story wasn't just about triumph. It was about survival, about finding worth in myself when no one else did, about carrying scars that would never fully fade but learning to see them not as shame but as proof. Proof that I had endured. Proof that I had risen. That night, I stood at the window of my penthouse, the city lights glittering like stars. My reflection stared back at me, no longer the forgotten daughter, no longer the outcast in the garage. I was Catherine Miller, CEO, survivor woman, whole. And I whispered to myself, you were always enough. If my story touched you, if you've ever felt invisible or pushed aside, or told you'd never become anything, then let this be your reminder. Your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. Build your life. Reclaim your power. Write your own story. If you found strength in my journey, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories like this. And don't forget to leave a comment. I'd love to hear your story too. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not the empire you build, but the peace you finally find.